Hey everyone, welcome back. You know how we do deep dives on this show?
Uh-huh.
Well, today we're going to be diving into something called E prime.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, have you ever heard of E prime before?
I have heard of it, and I'm very curious to learn more.
Great. Well, basically it's a way of speaking and writing in English without using any form of the verb to be.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How is that even possible? It seems like such a fundamental part of language.
Yeah. Right. Like how can you even talk without saying is or are or was or anything like that?
Exactly.
That's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at some excerpts from this book on E prime, and I like talking about how it can maybe change the way we think,
Yeah.
and even like how it unlocks these like kind of miraculous problem-solving abilities.
Miraculous. Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. Tell me more about this E prime. Where did it come from?
So E prime,
Yeah.
it actually comes from two guys named Alfred Korzybski
Okay.
and D. David Bourland Jr.
Never heard of them.
Yeah, you probably haven't, but don't worry about it.
Okay.
We'll get there. But they developed this concept, and they believed that the overuse of the verb to be could actually limit our understanding of the world.
I can see how that might happen. We used to be all the time to make definitive statements, but the world is rarely so black and white, is it?
Exactly. And Korzybski actually, he called this idea
Yeah.
the is of identity.
Okay. The is of identity. So how does that work?
So
Go ahead.
basically, it's where we define things as static and unchanging, like we're putting them in these little boxes, with these labels.
Like putting a label on a jar and then never looking inside to see what's really there?
Precisely.
Okay. So, can you give me a real-world example of how this is of identity can limit our thinking?
Absolutely. So, like, let's take a statement, like Joe is a communist.
Okay, Joe's a communist. A pretty bold statement.
Yeah. So it's like it sounds simple, right?
Yeah.
But it actually oversimplifies a
Well,
really complex set of beliefs and behaviors.
it's reducing a whole person with all their complexities and nuances to a single label. I see how that could be problematic.
Yeah, and it's like another example is like saying like the universe is a giant machine.
Right, very Newtonian.
Right.
It's trying to force this vast, dynamic, ever-changing universe into a limited mechanical framework, like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
It's kind of like we're trying to define like a flowing river by taking a single snapshot.
Ooh, I like that analogy. You capture one moment, but you miss the flow, the movement, the constant change that makes a river what it is.
Yeah, and so like how does E prime help us see beyond these like snapshots?
Yeah, how do we break free from the is of identity trap?
So basically E prime, it forces us to describe things more in terms of processes and relationships, so it like highlights change and avoids those static labels.
Sounds like a more dynamic way of thinking.
So instead of saying like Joe was a communist,
Mhm.
you could say something like Joe frequently expresses views that align with communist ideologies.
Joe frequently expresses views. Okay, so we're focusing on observable actions rather than making a definitive statement about his inherent nature. It's more descriptive.
Exactly.
It feels more accurate too, doesn't it? Like we're acknowledging that we don't have a perfect, unchanging view of who Joe is.
Right, and it doesn't deny reality, but it describes it in a more dynamic and fluid way.
Interesting.
And it's kind of similar to how some scientists actually approach their work, right?
Oh, absolutely. This reminds me of the concept of operationalism, where we define things by what they do, not by some abstract label, like a chair. It's not just a chair because we call it a chair. It's a chair because you can sit on it, stand on it, use it to reach a high shelf, or,
Right.
even use as a weapon if you get desperate.
Yeah. I never thought of a chair as a potential weapon, but I guess in the right context it could be. But that's a great point. It's about focusing on the observable actions, the functions, the processes.
Right. And many scientists, especially in fields where it's all about observable data and repeatable experiments, they find themselves naturally writing in this kind of style, even if they don't realize it's E prime.
It's like a scientific language hack almost.
Yeah, I like that.
So this book, it actually talks about E prime as like a software upgrade for our brains.
A software upgrade. Okay, I'm really liking these computer analogies.
Right? Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Sure. So think of it this way. Our thoughts, they're like the software running on the hardware of our brains, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the language we use, that's like the code that shapes our thoughts.
Okay.
So just like with a computer, if you input, flawed code, you're going to get flawed output. But E prime, it's like a code upgrade, helping us to avoid garbage in, garbage out, by encouraging us to be more precise and nuanced in our thinking.
It's like we're optimizing the code to make the software run more smoothly and efficiently.
Exactly.
So, by changing our language, it's almost like we're rewiring our brains to think more critically and more flexibly. This all sounds really amazing, like almost too good to be true.
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful idea.
But, earlier we mentioned, like, these miraculous problem-solving abilities, right? Does the book have any, like, specific examples of how that works?
Okay, well, it doesn't promise literal miracles, but it does suggest that E prime can help us break free from some of the limitations of traditional thinking, like the classic Aristotelian logic
Oh, yeah.
that often relies on like really rigid categories and binary oppositions.
Like this or that, right or wrong, black or white kind of thinking.
Exactly. So by moving away from those kinds of rigid structures, E prime allows us to see more possibilities and maybe approach complex problems with a bit more creativity.
It's like we're opening up our minds to shades of gray and a whole spectrum of colors instead of just seeing things in black and white. It's pretty exciting, I gotta say.
I agree.
Okay, so let's get a little bit practical here.
Yeah, let's see E prime in action.
Yeah, can you give us a couple more examples of like how E prime transforms these everyday sentences?
Absolutely. So how about instead of saying, the sky is blue,
The sky is blue.
we could say, the sky appears blue to me right now.
The sky appears blue to me right now.
Oh.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, in the first statement, it's presented as a fact. The sky is blue. End of story. But the second statement, it acknowledges that our perception is subjective. The sky appears blue to me. Maybe it appears a different shade to you, or maybe it'll look different later depending on the time of day or the weather conditions.
Yeah, so it emphasizes the dynamic nature of even seemingly constant things.
Precisely.
Okay, that's a good one. What about something a little more, emotional, like she is angry?
She is angry. Okay, let's try that one. Instead, we could say she's yelling, her face appears flushed, and she's waving her arms rapidly.
Wow, that paints a much more vivid picture.
Right. We're moving away from a static label, angry, and we're describing observable behaviors. We're showing, not telling.
E prime really does force you to pay attention to the details and avoid jumping to conclusions, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that's one of its greatest strengths.
Yeah, this whole deep dive has been so fascinating.
It's been great talking about it.
Yeah, it's not only like introduced me to this new way of speaking, but it's a whole new way of thinking.
It really is. And I think the key takeaway here is this. E prime, it isn't just some grammar quirk. It's a powerful tool for thinking more clearly, more accurately about the world.
It's about moving beyond those simplistic labels
Yeah.
and engaging with the world in a way that's more nuanced and dynamic and ultimately more insightful.
Couldn't said it better myself.
So, to everyone listening out there, after learning about E prime, I'd encourage you to start paying attention to how often you use those to be statements in your own life.
It's an interesting exercise.
Are you defining things or are you describing them? And how might those subtle choices be shaping your perceptions of the world and even your interactions with others? It's something to think about.
Definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then. Bye. Bye.